Do you have a property and not sure if you should rent it short-term or long-term?
Want to understand the pros and cons of both?
Watch this video. We're the Investor Couple. I'm Mel.
I'm Dave.
And we're the Investor Couple. On this channel, we teach real people like you the secrets to time freedom, location freedom, and financial freedom through real estate investing.
New tips every week, so make sure to subscribe. So stay tuned. We're going to be going on the whiteboard later to do a final showdown to see which one works best for you between short-term and long-term.
Let's start off by being transparent. The past few months have been a nightmare for most short-term investors due to COVID.
Okay, the world got hit by a pandemic. It's not something that happens all the time. We get it. But the world is recovering. So let's see which investment type brings in the most amount of money, has the least amount of work, and is the best fit for you.
Is it short-term or is it long-term? Make sure to stay right till the end before you make your decision.
I don't know. Steak or salmon. Every time it's the same thing.
The first question is not about you, but about your property.
You're going to have to ask yourself a couple of different questions in regards to your goals with this property. That's going to touch on things such as where it's located, your strategies, the amount of work and effort you want to put into it.
Does the city have more long-term or short-term rentals? Is it a tourism town? What are the rental rules? Did you know that there are places where short-term rentals are not allowed? And what is unique and different about your property? Why should they rent yours over someone else's?
This is not my property. If you bought this, would you rent it out short-term or long-term? Comment below.
Now let's leave the property aside for a second and talk about you. What is your profile? Try to answer these questions to better understand your goals. What kind of investor are you? What is your availability and willingness to be a great property manager and a landlord? What's an acceptable cash flow for you? Be honest with yourself. Answer these 3 questions to determine the role you're willing to play.
So pick your lane. Be honest with yourself. There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, short-term rentals might not work for me, or hey, long-term rentals doesn't really suit my needs. Having a specific niche and knowing what works for you is very important.
Yes, and it enables you to do it very well. The goal is to generate the most income possible. So let's break down short-term versus long-term.
So let's start with short-term. Short-term has the possibility of making a lot more income than long-term rentals. Why? Because if you get someone renting your, let's say, Airbnb or VRBO or HomeAway property for continuous nights throughout that month, you're gonna make a lot of cash flow.
The cons are, what if it doesn't get rented very often? What if it's only a couple of times out of the month? It's not necessarily a stable income.
Let's discuss the lake house when Mel and I rent out. Now we do this for the flexibility. We want to actually use the lake house for ourselves, okay? So we're not treating it necessarily like we would other income properties. We're doing it to enjoy it and rent it out to pay for the bills, okay? Now on average, we rent it out for roughly $300 a night. So let's do times 7 nights, 1 week a month, equals $2,100, okay? So that's what we'd make on average roughly a month. Now, if we rent that out 7 days a month times 12 months comes up to 84 days a year, okay? So 365 divided by 4 comes up to 91 or so. So we actually rent this for less than 25% of the year, okay? So we actually get to utilize it for 75%. Now the way Mel and I look at it is the monthly income that comes in basically pays for the asset, okay? Again, the way that we're utilizing this short-term rental is for the flexibility, for the pleasure of it. So we get kind of best of both worlds. We get to utilize it for, 3/4 of the year as opposed to renting it out for just 25% of the year. And our bills are pretty much paid. So it's almost like a cost neutral asset that will continue to appreciate over time. Now, if you're a serious investor, you're obviously not just gonna wanna rent it 25% of the time. So you're gonna rent it maybe, 95% of the time. And the $300 that I had per night was on average. Because we take the entire summer for ourselves, maybe this hops up to $500 a night, right? So Looking at the flexibility of a short-term rental is very cool because you get to use it, you get to make some money, or you get to make more money and just use it a little, depending on you and what you're looking for. Long-term rentals. Let's go over the pros and cons of this one as well.
The pros are that you've already negotiated how much money you'll be bringing in that month with the tenant.
And depending what type of investor you are, you might want to know that you're going to get that stable income for a long period of time, a guaranteed number.
The pros are that you've already pre-negotiated how much rent you're going to be collecting from the tenant for the month. Now, we solely own over 170 units, and during COVID, these units are long-term rentals. They continued to make us money every single month.
So another thing to weigh out is during something like a pandemic, everyone always needs a place to live, right? Not everyone needs a place to vacation all the time, however.
Exactly. It was an essential service. We need water, food, and shelter.
Now, on the flip side, long-term rentals most likely will be less money per month. And that is a trade-off for the long, stable income. It's less money at a time.
Yes, and to add to that, Dave, the other thing as well is what if they can't or don't pay rent? Whether it's a short-term or long-term rental, you're going to need to manage it.
Now let's break down the management of each style. So first off, short-term rentals. I almost find that there's more management involved. There's more going to the property, there's more hands-on because you're dealing with a lot more people. With our short-term cottage, our property manager has to go to the property several times in that month, along with other maintenance staff and maintenance crew. For example, every time our lake house gets rented out, our property manager has to communicate with them, has to set up, has to do payment, has to inspect prior, has to inspect after they've gone through. So it's a lot of work for every single time a new patron or someone wants to go through and rent your property. Now, the client interaction will be very different in the short-term rentals. You're mostly going to be talking to them when they're settling into the property, if they have an issue with one of the appliances or something in the property, or when they're actually leaving and checking out.
Now, most people want a 5-star review. So that means that they're maybe a little bit more careful and take better care of your property. Now, the cons for a long-term rental is what if a tenant doesn't pay rent? You're gonna have to go through that long, dreaded eviction process.
And like most investors, if you've signed a 12-month lease or rental agreement, that's a year. If you have a bad tenant, you're now going to be stuck with them for a long period of time. As opposed to the short-term rentals, it might be just a few nights.
Yes, we've had some tenants that we just couldn't wait to get out of there.
Get out! Another con about long-term rentals is you will fall under specific provincial or state legislation that tells you exactly how you need to do specific things in regards to the tenancy.
Yes, so you have to make sure to listen to the rules so you don't get yourself in trouble. Now for the pros. People will always need a place to live. Long-term rentals have been around forever.
You can rest assured that no municipality, no bylaw can be put towards not having long-term rentals. It just won't happen. It just doesn't make sense.
Yes, you certainly have more of a sense of control over it. Let's talk about expenses.
So short-term versus long-term. They will have a lot of the same base expenses. Now, the one major difference is that short-term rentals will have additional unique expenses that you would not have on the long-term side.
For example, furniture. Now, this will be a fairly expensive cost. You have to furnish the entire place. Bedrooms, living room, kitchen.
And with that furniture, there's going to be wear and tear. I know when I go to other places and stay at these short-term rentals, I don't want old, raggedy furniture. I want something that's modern, that's clean, and that isn't falling apart. So this is something that's going to be a continuous upkeep with buying furniture, replacing old furniture, and making sure the place looks nice and crisp.
Now, pro tip for you, make sure to choose wise colors so they last longer.
If you like this pro tip, give us a like.
Other expenses as well are things like towels, pots and pans, decorations,
Cookware, silverware, anything that you would need at your own house.
definitely a coffee machine.
Cleaning expenses are going to be a major part of your short-term rentals. Every time someone leaves, you're going to have someone go in, clean the unit, top to bottom, to ensure that it's ready for the next person. They are also going to need to make sure while they're there in that short period of time to wash all the towels and replace them, wash all the bedding, the linens, and replace it. So you're gonna have to have a couple of sets in order to keep that process rolling when the cleaning person goes in.
Now, depending how long the stay is for each tenant might increase significantly your monthly costs.
Another expense that you might not have in long-term rentals to accommodate your short-term rental guests: Wi-Fi, cable, telephone. So those are things that people often forget about when comparing the two.
Now, with long-term rentals, the expenses may not be as frequently, but when they do happen, they may be more, right? Tenant moves out and perhaps they trash the place and you need to repaint. Maybe they smoke in the unit and you need to redo the entire place. That's when the monthly cost may end up being higher than expected.
So for example, with our lake house as a short-term rental, it's a lot of little expenses all the time, okay? As for with our long-term rentals, it's a lot less expenses, but they're there constantly. And when a tenant moves out, like Mel said, it's a lot of big expenses all at once.
So there's no way around it. Either way, there's expenses. Do you have a preference between long-term and short-term rentals? I'm curious. Comment below and explain why.
Flexibility and the ability to actually stay at one of your assets. This is something, again, that's so different between short-term rentals and long-term rentals. So Mel and I have over 19 years combined of real estate investing experience. We currently own 27 buildings and over 170 units. Now, those are all long-term rentals that we don't necessarily want to utilize to go live in, because that's not the point of it. We utilize that to make a steady cash flow and generational wealth.
These long-term rentals also changed our lives. We were both able to quit our full-time jobs in our 30s because we had enough cash flow coming in from those properties.
Think about it. When we purchased them, we did not purchase them for the flexibility of being able to take a vacation in them or sometimes, spend a night or two there. We bought them for the ability to produce income, and when someone moves out, we don't want there to be vacancy. We want another long-term tenant in there paying a reasonable rate for a long period of time.
The best part about short-term rentals is that you can take advantage of it. Now think about it. Perhaps you have a cottage. Perhaps you have a rental home in a beautiful city. You can actually book ahead of time and go there with your family.
So again, for example, with our lake house, we book basically the entire summer for ourselves because we want to enjoy it, boating and all that with the kids. And whenever there's blocks of time when someone else has not booked it, we get to utilize it as well. So it's really a best of both worlds, and it just depends on what you're looking for.
Let's go to the whiteboard and draw this out for you. All right, battle of the terms. So we're gonna be going one by one and seeing which one wins. Let's start off with cash flow. Short-term versus long-term. Cash flow, yes, absolutely. You can cash flow and make some great money with short-term rentals.
Long-term, same thing. People make generational wealth with this, right? So I think it's also check mark on this one.
Now expenses, we covered that. There are a lot of expenses, so I'm gonna put an X here, in my opinion.
Same here with long-term, there are expenses. They're fewer and far between, but when they happen, they're more expensive.
Management, for short term, it is very continuous. So I'm gonna give myself here an X as well.
Management long term, and honestly, it's all in the beginning. Once you get a tenant in, once you sign the lease, unless there's maintenance issues here and there, you're not gonna hear that much from the tenant. So management, if it's done right here.
Flexibility. Now, this is very flexible. As we discussed, you may want to go there for a couple of weeks and you're able to do so. So flexibility, I'm giving myself a check mark.
Unfortunately, I can't give myself a check mark on flexibility. Long term, it's built for one purpose, and it's to rent it out to tenants for years and years at a time. So flexibility, X.
Now risk. Yes, it is riskier, and think back during COVID, the pandemic, right? A lot of people struggled during this time. So for that reason, I'm giving myself an X here.
The other thing too on that, Mel, is what worries me about short-term rentals. Cities can put bylaws, municipalities can put bylaws or restrictions, or condo buildings can say no to short-term rentals. So that worries me. Whereas over here on the long term, it's been around forever and it's not going anywhere because people will always need a place to stay.
It's a personal choice. There's pros and cons. Either way, what is best for you? If you like comparable videos like the one we just did, make sure to check out this video where we compare rent versus sell. I'm Mel.
And I'm Dave, and we'll see you in that video.